All I can say about the new chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen is that it's unbelievably insane, because we follow the continuation of Sukuna using his flames on our heroes, and not only that, but I have to warn you to be prepared while we dive into it, because there are some heartbreaking moments and also a returning character that quite literally changes the playing field. But getting right into it, the new chapter 259 starts off in another flashback. This one starts off with Choso and Noritoshi trying to teach Yuji blood manipulation. Yuji asks Choso specifically about the trick to convergence, and since they only have a month, he needs all the advice he can get. And Yuji also confirms that he's doing switch training with Kusekabe and also Yuta as well, so he'll need to learn blood manipulation the hard way. And we know that Kusekabe has already instilled curse manipulation and simple domain techniques into Yuji, so what could Yuta offer him? At first I thought it was going to be reverse curse technique, but there's already several people who can use it, so why Yuta? And as we find out more later, Sukuna has already used it plenty of times within Yuji, so it was almost already practically ingrained into him. What I think it could be is that it could potentially be to use and master domain expansion techniques. Since Yuji only unlocked Shrine through his Black Flash fight with Sukuna, he probably hasn't used domain expansion at all. Regardless of this, even Yuta just using his domain while on Yuji's body would help him burn the principles into it. So fingers crossed for Yuji to use domain expansion in the near future. I really feel it getting closer. Now back to the chapter, Choso tries to explain what convergence is, but he's terrible at explaining because, like Gojo, the technique comes from his innate talent, and Yuji as well gets frustrated at Choso's lack of teaching skills. Noritoshi then chimes in that Yuji needs to think of bathing in hot water, the heat encompassing his entire body, because in that same way he can expand and feel the blood vessels outlining his own body, and that's the basic foundation of blood manipulation. But Yuji, like Yuji does, wonders if it's like when you piss yourself. Oh Yuji, never change. Noritoshi then explains that convergence is a technique that compresses the blood, and he needs to use something that crumbles easily like a sponge or cans in order to help him imagine it. And Yuji then mocks Choso's teaching ability in comparison to Noritoshi's, and he gets mad asking to teach Supernova, but Noritoshi reminds him they need to instill the basics into Yuji since they don't have time to make it a potent weapon, which makes just Choso pout. And poor Choso, he just wants to teach Yuji and be a good brother, but don't worry, he gets his moment later. And now we're back to the present day where Sukuna points his flames at our heroes while smiling maniacally. And the narrator then explains, confirming a long-awaited theory about the flames in connection to Sukuna's technique. Basically, Sukuna can only open the doors to his furnace after preparing his ingredients using cleave and dismantle, which is exactly what I said in my last video. That the kitchen translation actually makes so much sense. He is a cook. The strongest sorcerer is quite literally a chef. However, despite the absurd firepower, the flames lack speed and range, so Sukuna used another binding vow to amend this, that outside of his domain, the flames cannot be used on multiple targets. And the translations for this bit are actually way too complicated, which is surprising because it's not even been translated by John Werry, so you'd assume that it would be relatively good, but I've done my due diligence and researched several different translations to get the right context. So basically, after Malevolent Shrine turns everything to dust, the dust particles actually acquire an explosive cursed energy that is at the same power of his furnace without all the binding vows. And we'll see this in a little bit, but before that, Sukuna also altered his domain again to allow entry for living things, but they are no longer allowed to escape, which maintains the shrine's output while sealing it. We also quickly see Uraumi as they explain to Hakari that this is their victory, and Yuji looks on as the catalyst for the explosive dust, being the flame arrow, fires towards the ground. And the explosion that ensues is unfathomably huge, destroying everything in its path. And the narrator goes on to say that the heat spread immediately with compressed and decompressed shockwave, which ensures the death of every living thing. And how the narrator explains it is quite complicated, so I'll say that it basically acts like a thermobaric explosive, which utilizes oxygen from the surrounding air similar to the dust to create a high temperature explosion, resulting in a devastating blast wave and intense heat. It also depletes the surrounding oxygen, making it particularly destructive. This is the final technique used by Sukuna that was able to instantly obliterate Mahoraga. And that's the major word here, final. The entirety of Sukuna's technique has now been revealed, and that means most, if not all of the secrets have now been shown so far, which marks the final chapters of the manga. We have to prepare ourselves that this is the big finale, and after reading Jujutsu Kaisen for so long, it honestly doesn't feel real. But getting back into the chapter, Gege was kind enough to let us know the reason why Sukuna didn't use his furnace against Gojo. And that's because his constant alterations and the many uses of binding valves to change the range of his domain expansion meant that his furnace remained cool and he couldn't unseal his flames. And I'm sure many of us are still wondering about why that was the case, and now we finally gotten an answer. Suddenly we see Yuji in complete darkness as someone calls his name, and it's revealed to be Choso, who looks incredibly beaten. Yuji asks what he's doing, and we see them enveloped by Choso's blood barrier, which is protecting him from the flames. As Choso looks at him, Yuji begs him not to do this, but he starts to die, getting more and more covered in blood. He apologizes for being useless during training and says that he does things instinctively. Yuji calls out, but he's cut off as we see the blood barrier getting coated in Sukuna's flames. Yuji then says that Choso hit the nail on the head with instinctively, and we enter a dreamlike sequence that we've seen before in Choso's fake memory, but this time only Choso and Yuji sit opposite from each other. Choso compliments Yuji, saying he learned reverse curse technique a lot quicker than him, but Yuji just states that it was because of Sukuna using it in his body, and Choso then says not to be modest, and it's natural for a little brother to surpass his big brother. Yuji tries to get him to stay, but Choso says he needs to apologize to Yuki as well, and then tells Yuji he's also sorry for leaving him on his own again. But Yuji tells him not to worry since Choso was there when he needed him most, and that's more than enough. Choso is surprised by this and is reminded of the time he comforted and talked to his younger brothers as cursed wombs, and his time with Yuji was only a few days compared to their 150 years alive, and yet he thanks Yuji for being his little brother, and Yuji thanks him for being his big brother, while the blood barrier fades away amongst the smoking remnants of Shinjuku. And now, with Choso completely gone, he stands up and meekly asks if anyone is alive, and a figure appears among the flames and smoke, and the narrator then says that Yuji always told himself that he was a cog and would fulfill that role. He should be able to repay his brother who gave his life for him, but now stood in this scorched earth, his conviction has been shaken, just like in Shibuya. The figure in the smoke emerges, and it's Sukuna, seemingly unfazed and still ready to fight. Yuji grimaces at the sight, but he notices something else. Another figure also appears, and with one brother gone, another brother steps forward, with Todo being revealed, with his hand wrapped in bandages, also ready to fight. Yuji immediately calls out to him, but before that we get a flashback where Mei and Todo are discussing a plan to use her crows and his technique to rescue people from inside Sukuna's domain. So basically he'd use his technique to swap their positions with her crows, allowing them to bypass the barrier. They continue that Sukuna's domain means instant death, so it's not a guarantee they can save lives, but it's worth a shot. Mei then states that since Todo will be outside the domain's range, he'll have to extend his technique. He'll also have to manage over 4 targets, so she asks him if him and his arm is up to the task. And to everyone's absolute happiness, he responds that he still feels his technique beating inside of him, meaning it's not over. He must have either another hand placed on him, or someone's reverse curse technique is particularly powerful, though it's not revealed in this chapter. Todo then asks her if she understands why they can't let Yuji know of this plan, and she states it's because of him and Sukuna's resonance. Even though their bodies aren't one anymore, their soul's connection runs thick. and they also reference back to the Yasuhachi bridge mission where 2 of the fingers resonated. Mei wonders if Todo is suggesting that Yuji may unconsciously reveal the plan to Sukuna, and he confirms it's true, and that they'll also do the same with Yuta's plan, since if you remember, he also ingested a finger in order to copy Sukuna's curse technique. He then tells her not to tell anyone, and she agrees. But back to the present, the narrator then states that in this moment, there wasn't enough time to tell Yuji about his plan with Mei, as well as the return of his technique, and also being unable to verify the safety of his allies and the fact that he couldn't swap out Itadori and Choso. And because there wasn't enough time to tell him all of this, all he can do is apologize to Yuji and tell him that everyone is probably fine. An attempt at being incredibly motivational for Yuji, like in Shibuya. Todo is quite literally Yuji's stand. He always comes in whenever Yuji's resolve wavers and then motivates him again. Even if this motivational speech is a little unsure, he's still there for him every time. And Yuji knows this because he instantly understands Todo and trusts him straight away. And while Yuji pumps his fists and Todo unwraps his hand, the narrator also continues that they couldn't just sit and chat because Sukuna has entered a state where using his curse technique is painstakingly difficult. And the chapter ends there, with Todo and Yuji squaring off against Sukuna. And now, with Sukuna having difficulty using his own technique, this is gonna be a classic Jujutsu Kaisen jumping from Todo and Yuji as they double team Sukuna. I mean, hopefully it's gonna be just like when they went up against Hanami and Mahito, but this time every hit is just black flash after black flash. I honestly cannot wait to see this animated, but I'm gonna be like 30 years old when that happens. Nevertheless, it's incredibly nice to see Todo arrive, even at the cost of losing Choso. And I also certainly hope that everyone else is safe, but we'll just have to wait until next chapter to see what happens. It's now coming to the end of the video, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I'm so happy you stopped by. My channel is steadily growing, and I'm amazed at the support I'm getting. And I also have a Patreon now, so feel free to support me however you like. The link will be in the description, and I will shout out names at the end of each video. Thank you again, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.